able or inclined to come to the first half, I will give a very quick rundown of what it was that was covered. The panel was written to be more informative than editorial, but I did provide some context and commentary for some of the causes behind the adaptations and what was going on societally that was leading to these particular things being adapted. We went over various anime adapted from non-Japanese sources with an intentional focus on largely Western works, which are treated by the industry traditionally as more inherently foreign than works from more. They're like, you're good, you're absolutely fine, happy. I'm just going to flash through some of the original slides as people are getting sorted out, which is context, but also hopefully I won't linger long enough on the previous year's content to bore anybody who's been to both panels. The first category last year was gaming, discussed Maple Story as an example of anime as entertainment, Dragon Age is an example of more commercial tie-ins, and Wizardry is an example of an anime that exists simply because Japan liked to get game even more than the Westerners did. Comics. We've got more obscure. From the then upcoming Suicide Squad Isekai to Wowzer, Oxtails and Future Sagittarius, and a look at Scott Pilgrim as an opportunity to expand on themes that aren't covered in the original source material. There was a brief detour to continuation of children's properties that have been popular in Japan, and things which weren't, things where there was a demand for them to make more episodes. That's not the kiddie ones. Didn't number these. There we are. Oh, those are more comics. Yeah, there we are. The kids ones that they added more of for Japan. Even though some of these then came back over, of course. We also looked at the slightly surprising existence of two separate anime based on Western music. We had The Bluebird and Genie with the Light Brown Hair. The final section of last year's panel covered anime based around real-world narratives from a Western perspective, or from major Western figures. Anne Frank through Marie Antoinette and on to Alexander the Great. Although I couldn't resist mentioning Zhu Boyan, because parody comedy is an insane concept which really shouldn't work. Last year ended on Beyond the Rainbow, the story of Princess Diana, a dreadful little anime shoveled out in 1986 to coincide with a visit to Japan by the royal family. I think I spent longer editing my clips for that than the original shoot date. So essentially the original conclusion drawn from that panel was that the way Japan treats anime source material from the West has fundamentally changed over the decades. Commentators have suggested that there was originally a tendency towards keeping a respectful distance emotionally from the works. They were seen as more fundamentally foreign to a Japanese audience than they seem to be being treated as now. There are far more modern examples of collaborative works and of Japanese creators putting their own spin on existing IP and narratives that may have originally come from the West. Covering literary works for today should lend further credence to this perspective. The more traditional, semi-direct adaptations of improving works of literature aimed at the morality of our upstanding Japanese youth have largely given way, as these narratives are now treated as more familiar to their young audience. We're also far more likely than we used to be to get sideways takes and unusual looks at established stories and narratives. Furthermore, there are far more works aimed specifically at an adult fan base than there used to be, which is further reflected in adaptational work and what their choices are in terms of what it is that they pick and what it is that they do with it once they've chosen it. I'm also going to take a moment to look at a couple of unusual trends within literature that have been incorporated into anime tropes, as well as the tendency for anime these days to treat Western literature as a setting, rather than a set of unrelated or semi-related works in and of themselves. So, onto the new material. A quick note that once again, for the purpose of the panel, I'm treating anime as any animation produced primarily in Japan with an intended Japanese or near simultaneous Japanese release and international audience. This is not an aesthetic definition, but a production one, as I'm interested in looking at creative considerations when anime are devised. I mention this partly in case it really bothers anybody that I've missed anything that seems like an obvious get. For instance, I'd love to include The Last Unicorn as an anime, but the screenplay, the director, and the target audience were all American, despite the fact that, is it animated by Topcraft, anybody? I think it was Topcraft. So, I'm going to begin with a particularly interesting and odd trend, not one that we can call strictly adaptational, but one which follows on the idea of Japanese creators becoming increasingly comfortable when they're mining Western culture for their inspirational materials. When viewing the Western canon at a remove, I feel like there's a fun subgenre which has become increasingly established. I don't think it actually has a name yet, and I've not really heard it discussed much, but it definitely fits within that remit of adaptational works. It's something I'd like to call for today the fruit salad approach to adapting works for animation. The contents contain many things in common with one another, and they harmonise well, they have a great flavour, but they're not from any single origin. It's a little hard to define, so let's look over a few of them, and how they handle that idea in various ways. And as I've tried to do before, I'm probably going to start with some more familiar works and move towards less familiar works, because I would like to surprise at least some of the old heads in the audience. I am absolutely looking at AJ. Thanks again for your support and your enthusiastically curated ideas. You are a brilliant support in writing such nonsense. So we start with one I'm sure a few of you have heard of. Princess Tutu. Now, for anybody who's not familiar with it, I would say that we can call Princess Tutu an anime that is set in the world of fairy tale as a genericized concept. It sticks entirely to Western canonical references and imagery when it's devising stories about stories. In this show about a duck who is a magical girl who is a ballerina, a duck who is magically a girl who is a ballerina who is a magical girl, and her fight against terrible narratives that hurt her friends. All of the sources that are drawn on for those stories that she's interacting with, and the very surface level, the very apparent in the story, even though they're dealt with emotionally, narratives, they are all exclusively Western. We have the Never-Ending Story, E.T.A. Hoffmann's The Sandman, and The Happy Prince, which were all directly invoked. And there are also a lot of traditional folktales that are hugely important. Again, they rely exclusively on Western ones. These have included The Ugly Duckling, obviously, The Old Street Lamp, The Red Shoes, Hansel and Gretel, The Strange Musician, and The Old Woman in the Woods. We have another familiar but very, very tonally different one now. Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. There is one piece of Japanese folklore in it.
Go on.
The episode with the lamp that's sad it's been abandoned.
Oh, that's very
Japanese folklore entirely. There's a lamp and it's turned evil because it's been left behind by its family and it's really sad, and then...
See, that is so Japanese, but I thought that's so Japanese that they don't realise it's Japanese.
Yes,
but that's what the stories feel like.
That's the only fairy tale that isn't from the European tradition.
Yeah, that makes it super interesting. No, I definitely want interruptions. I should have been more straight up about that. No, don't be sorry.
You know
the only bad thing is being sorry.
And I'm not sorry.
I only watched Princess Tutu because you gave it to me. Your nice hard copy. So, moving on to Bungo Stray Dogs, this is another sort of story that's cramming a bunch of ideas about narrative into a single narrative, and those ideas are not inherently related. And I will say that it does predominantly use Japanese sources for this fruit style adaptive work. But that is because the mangaka has chosen the theme of literature rather than the overall theme of Western story, Western history, myth, legend, or fairy tale on which to draw. I still feel that it's something worth touching on, at least, when considering the notion of remixing elements that have a shared theme. It's a hard show to explain neatly, but essentially it's set in a broadly realistic world where various people keep running into each other and fighting the mafia and such. Every important character is named after a literary author and has both supernatural skills and some character traits reflecting either aspects of the author's life or their works. As the story is set largely in Japan, major characters include Kinkyu Doppo, Nakara Chuya, Dazai Samu, and Edogawa Rampo, to name but a few. But as soon as the story steps outside of Japan, it absolutely relishes being able to bring Western literature into that mix, same as the other things we've been looking at. So we have, as actual characters in the show, Lucy Maud Montgomery, the author of Anne of Green Gables, Louisa May Alcott, the author of Little Women, we've got Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, Mark Twain, Herman Melville, Margaret Mitchell, Nathaniel Hawthorne, John Steinbeck, and we have all the Russians, Pushkin, Dostoevsky, Gontrol. We also have Rimbaud, Verlaine, Mary Shelley, Jules Verne, Bram Stoker, and Agatha Christie as characters in this silly fight show. They run around battling in airships and casinos and turning into tigers and such. It is a deeply odd anime, but it's certainly one that I would find relevant to discussing the concept of an adaptive remix of narrative stuff. I have next a much clearer example of what I'm describing. I suspect one or two people from a certain cosplay group might have guessed this is coming. So, Undead Girl Murder Farce is based on a Japanese novel series, and it follows the story of an immortal woman who has been beheaded by a British assailant, and she wants to get her body back. She journeys to the UK as a head in the bird cage, trying to unravel the mystery and seek her revenge. Now, these core characters are all wholly original creations of the author, as far as I'm aware. But by the time that they arrive in Europe, Arsène Lupin, the Phantom of the Opera, who are banging, Holmes and Watson, actual real person Aleister Crowley, fictional lesbian vampire Carmilla, and debatably real figure Jack the Ripper all become part of the story, as does a certain large undead monster going by the name of Victor. It is a very good and very mad anime, and I'm going to throw in the opening animation to give an idea of the side of feeling that Japanese creatives are becoming inclined to take comfortable Western story elements and put a major spin on them. It feels like something that's now familiar enough that they are able to create something new using these established notions, while they still exist at enough of a remove that they're defined as being Western. I also feel that the use of original Japanese characters alongside these adapted characters is a way of grounding the story for a Japanese or intended audience. This, of course, is a far cry from the much more direct and straightforward adaptations we've seen from the 70s and 80s. Extremely fun anime that many people need to hear more about. So, I have at least just one more example in this category that I'm calling a fruit salad remix notion, and that would be The Empire of Corpses.
Yes!
What the hell? I watched that thinking it was going to be bad. My wife bought it for me because it had Miki Shinichiro in it, and that's how shallow I am. And she was like, oh, this is probably terrible, let's watch it. It's not. Oh, it's
We
really
saw an
good.
AMV about it and then had to track it down.
Yeah, it's like, what is that? So, I'll tell you what it is, thank you notes. It is an ambitious sci-fi Victoriana film, and it initially sets its own tone. It doesn't immediately make clear that this work is speculative fiction, which centres on the use of repurposed corpses as a form of early computer. It's packed with a mixture of fictional characters and real-life historical figures. The protagonist is John Watson, who, after being caught by M, agrees to become an agent of the British Empire, seeking one of the brothers Karamazov, who is hiding in Kabul. And there are other literary works from the West, selectively scattered throughout the story, but why would I ruin any major surprises? Furthermore, the bodyguard Frederick Burnaby, the soldier Yamazawa Seigo, and President Grant, all appearing in this film, are real people. It's one of 3 films based on the works of Fujimi Shoba, who unfortunately passed before his time some years ago. But it is a really, really interesting concept to treat it as high-end and not schlocky, and not like inherently a horror thing, though there are horror elements in it, to combine these things. It's not screamingly genre, even though it's a sci-fi film. It's honestly kind of a dry film, despite being very fun in places. And I really, really rate that. So we're going to take a quick break from the core concept of directly utilising works and characters from the West. Instead, I want to discuss a subset of tropes originating from a single work of Western literature. The Phantom Thief archetype is an entire aesthetic and storytelling sensibility, which is very, very easily traceable to Maurice Leblanc's Arsène Lupin Gentleman Thief novels. The fictional Gentleman Thief and Master of Disguise appeared in French magazines beginning in 1905 and was very popular internationally. Arsène Lupin in his time also crossed over unofficially with Sherlock Holmes, though debatably after a bit of a row with Conan Doyle, they had to change the name to Sherlock Sholmes.
I'm still doing that today.
Yeah. Well, that is probably a reference to this in the first place. And Lupin's arch enemy and lover is the alleged granddaughter of the real-life Italian occultist Count Alessandro di Cagliostro. Now, your typical phantom thief, as they now appear in other works, this is a concept that's so common in anime that it has its own name, kaito. They may have any combination of the following characteristics, usually having many or all. Your kaito does not steal expensive items, they steal priceless items. There's an important difference. Your kaito leaves a physical calling card before committing the theft. Usually before, sometimes after. They're a master of disguise. They use trickery and illusion to escape undetected. They very often have a rival in the form of a great detective, a metante, or a stubborn police inspector. The kaito has a strict code of honour, ranging from refusing to commit murder to outright announcing their heist in advance. The kaito steals for reasons other than personal gain. The kaito may or may not break the laws of physics and or common sense. And fundamentally, the kaito is intended to be a figure of admiration for the audience, whether or not they appear as the protagonist. The fashion sense of the kaito is also traditionally very good but anachronistic within their own setting. It's usually a classic Western suit of some kind, which seems related to Arsène Lupin's original era and depiction. The most obvious direct influence that this particular set of stories has had on Japanese media would be the existence of a further Lupin character. Monkey Bunch's Lupin III, an initially niche little adult franchise which slowly caught on during late-night reruns, perhaps aided by the talent of young creators such as the then lesser-known Hayao Miyazaki. But while the original Lupin manga features many of the calling cards of the kaito, he did stand on his own for a while in the Japanese media landscape, perhaps because Lupin III was intentionally originally cast as a more modern figure, a pseudo James Bond who is largely horrible and will never be allowed by the narrative to achieve a full victory. He's much softer over time and when adapted into anime. So it is perhaps for this reason that the earliest example of the kaito as a formalized trope in Japan has been suggested to be Asami Tezuka's character, Rainbow Parakeet, whose name comes from his mastery of disguise and his ability to mimic voices. Tezuka's influence on the manga and anime industry is impossible to overstate, so Rainbow Parakeet is surely the reason that this trope was able to become an archetype in Japan, rather than a set of overly specific ideas that are more associated with a single work of fiction. What have I got in here? There we go, I've got a little fun reel for you.
Ladies and gentlemen! ショーの始まりだぜ。
Tell me I'm wrong.
今日は人数も少ないし楽勝よ。最後の二次随賞は私がいただく。さあ。タクシーどこへ？待ちなさい。待ちなさいって。大変。
Don't worry about what those
笑ってるやつはそう簡単に卒業できるかな。なに？気がついたかジュお前たちが卒業するためには合格員が必要だということを忘れるんだ。何者だ？正体を表せ。私の名は怪盗ネズミキッド。
怪盗ネズミキッドって言ったわよ。
これを延長に渡す。
怪人二重面相と申します。怪人二重面相？怪しいものではありませんか。夜中にそういえばそうですね。すみません、間抜けなことを言って。笑ってる場合じゃないでしょ。
Couldn't get subs. This one's pretty self-explanatory. She proceeds to break and enter. So, what have I got down here? Oh yeah, more examples. Incidentally, Star of the Sen is actually one a great example of the Kaito archetype. I should have caught it last year because it is inspired by Alain Delon's 1964 movie The Black Tulip, which is a film itself named after Alexandre Dumas' novel La Tulip Noire, which is probably why I missed it, assuming it was to do with literature in the first place. It's a great example of the trope, but I missed one. Whoops. What else have we got? Just a real range of things that feature the Kaito archetype to a greater or lesser extent that people may have been thinking of. Absolutely. I would also, in my opinion, some of the appeal of the Kaito character in anime comes from the unexpected nature of the trope. Because people already kind of know what it is, they're able to bring up a Kaito in really unexpected settings. There's a throwaway character in the 2003 version of Full Metal Alchemist. There's a villain in the otherwise completely family-friendly and chill story Gargoyle of the Yoshinagas. And they use recognisable visual flourishes which can add a lot of drama or humour to quickly change up a situation. I've also noted something that people don't seem to talk about is that Kaito seem unusually fond of flying machines, hot air balloons and hang gliders. I feel that there may be some convergence with the development of the three-man band of villains, which dates back to Yataman, because these very synthetic villains are often seen using props and advanced preparation to perform improbable physical feats with shockingly low villainous effects, which is pretty much a direct lead into characters such as Pokemon's Team Rocket, who embody a combination of evil trio tropes with a surprising number of aesthetic flourishes that you can see might be linked to the Kaito ideal. So moving back to slightly more formal stuff, I've got a number of classic literature works aimed at adults and adapted to anime, whether or not they ended up as anime aimed at adults. Start with The Old Curiosity Shop, which is adapted to anime as Wandering Girl Nell. And yes, that was the best image I could find. I really took my time and did a lot of research in Japanese there, but no. Nell. Great. In this story, Nell is a young girl living with her grandfather who owns a shop in London. After he fails to pay back a loan, they flee his debt together in search of Nell's mother. So of course Dickens is not seen as being purely aimed at children. It can be viewed as classic or improving literature. And that is kind of still something that's in line with the world masterpiece theatre anime, which is back on that idea that anime is going to be able to lift improving things for a Western middle-class educational purpose. There are other accessible stories which would be suitable for children when sanitised, even if they weren't explicitly aimed at children when they were first published in the West. This would also include Sherlock Holmes, first appearing in The Study in Scarlet in 1887. Probably the most notable anime adaptation, though there are many, which I've cut for time, would be Mitante Holmes, Sherlock Hound. This is a child-oriented adaptation of the works of Arthur Conan Doyle, with steampunk overtones and a furry aesthetic. Hayao Miyazaki worked on 6 episodes, but there were some problems with the Conan Doyle estate, and after they'd worked out the legalities, Miyazaki had already moved on to other projects by the time that they worked on the show again. But a movie edit of The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle and Treasure Under the Sea actually debuted as a double bill with Nausicaa The Valley of the Wind in cinemas. Mitante Holmes is broadly in line with the original tone and stories of Sherlock Holmes up to a point, despite its looks. The more substantial changes include things like Sherlock's drug habit being reduced to pipe smoking, and Mrs. Hudson is portrayed as a more prominent and assertive character. There is some talk that Miyazaki wanted her to be this archetype who's running rings around the other detectives and then not really getting that that's happening, but that's not something that there's any sort of formal work, so it's just something that people talk about being maybe changed in production because people wanted a slightly more traditional one. I believe, if we're lucky, we may have a little bit of animation of this too. It's too pretty, you all need to see it if you haven't. Well, this is for a nice release from the box set. until we can make a lovely release now. Anybody maybe knows the West version? Yes, it's had lyrics recently. Oh, you can see Miyazaki's latest stuff all over YouTube. If you watch it just for that as well. I didn't edit this recording or anything. It's just made me hard. It's a long end, but I can see why. So, obviously not a particularly obscure one, but I have half an hour and loads of other anime left on this list, so please forgive me if I don't cover something people wanted to hear more about, but I am going to slowly get more obscure once again. We have another book I'd like to briefly look at, adapted to anime. We have The Call of the Wild by Jack London. This is an adventure narrative about a mixed breed dog who is stolen and sold on in Alaska as a sled dog. He becomes more and more suited to a wild and violent existence, achieving a state of nature, you may say. It's actually quite hard to find in Japanese because it originally aired just once as a TV special, but it was broadcast around the world in various dubs. In the English dub, Bryan Cranston plays 5 different characters. Now, some sources online suggest that this film would not have been considered suitable for children due to violence, but that has rarely stopped Japan, and I suspect it may be in the same mould as the other aspirationally improving sorts of story, as it is considered a great work of Western literature, accessible though it is, extremely bloody though it is. And much in the same vein, we have Jack London's White Fang, wherein a wolf-dog pup is taken in by humans and slowly begins to trust others a little on a long path to domestication. The anime features character designs by legendary artist Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, known as Yaz, who is more famous for Gundam, but also has his own various manga: Venus Wars, Arian, Gundam the Origin, Jesus, if you've come across it, which is a completely sincere manga, and Joan, which is Jan in Japan, which is it's a really weird manga. I tracked it down because I love Yaz. It's all about Joan of Arc has already died, and like a couple of years later there's this other teenage girl getting visions of Joan, but she's not actually as fighty as Joan, and she's kind of doing the Joan thing while making a lot of prayers to Joan, which is blasphemous, and people are trying to set her on fire and things, and she's jumping out of castles and having a really bad time. It's very interesting. So yeah, Yoshikazu Yasuhiko on this allegedly throwaway sort of anime really adds some qualities to it. A lot of the art I saw from it looked so lovely when I was researching. But there is another anime which is not White Fang, and has been called White Fang in the West sometimes. This is Flight of the White Wolf, which is set in 1970s Wisconsin. A rural boy has had a pet wolf for 7 years, a little incident, but when it kills a prize-winning show dog who wandered into their garden, the wolf's young owner is sure that the owners will have the dog put down, and he sets off to try and discreetly release the wolf prey into the Nicola National Forest. It was received an award for the Best Animated Film at the Mainichi Film Concours. In English, they dubbed and marketed it as though it were an adaptation of, in some way, of White Fang, even though this would be really clearly anachronistic. It's a 90s film set in the 70s. The goods in the shops, the clothing, everything about the show is very, very clearly set in the 70s at earliest. So it was apparently a very odd thing to come across without the context that this was not a White Fang film at all. But they probably thought it would sell better. We move to maybe a tiny bit more obscure once again. We have a Franz Kafka book, A Country Doctor. Legendary short creator Koji Yamamura made a direct adaptation of this short work. A Country Doctor is a surreal story about the psychological burden that a doctor can face when taking responsibility for people's lives. especially in a rural area and especially when facing harsh physical conditions. Kafka Inaka Isha has won multiple awards, including the Ofuji Nobel Award at the Mainichi Film Concours and the 2007 Grand Prize at the Ottawa International Animation Festival. Of course, a clear example of an anime which, while based on the cream of international literature, is not just based on a text that's not explicitly for children, but is an anime that you really wouldn't want to show to children. It's not just that it's inherently disturbing, it's that they just would not get anything out of it. It really is inherently a mature sort of story and a way of portraying that. Oh, my next note simply says lesbianism.
I write that down as well for myself.
You've got to remember to get your 5 a day. Just time myself. Okay, so the second sidebar of this panel, that's what they're called, would be that the otherness of Western literature has allowed Japanese audiences to be given works that use particular sets of aesthetics and tropes to explore themes of girlhood sexuality because it's viewed at a remove, which makes it safe to create ways to explore themes that might not be perceived as safe or legitimate in literature, anime and manga in general, and that I would argue that this is where the Yuri genre comes from. And with so few formative works from Yuri available in English, this might sound like an odd notion, but Erica Friedman is an academic working in English. She's done a great deal to collate as much information as possible regarding early Yuri and GL tropes and the development of these themes, and I highly recommend her writing. And if you don't think that there are such strong links to the West in the lesbian genre of anime, I want you to picture a rose garden, a school with formal uniforms and a high clock tower. There is an intricate system of school societies where they have strange social obligations and events, and there are strong whiffs of Catholicism everywhere you look. Now, did I just describe Onisama A, Revolutionary Girl Usha, Mario Samagamita, Yuri is my job, Mario Holic, or Oran High School Host Club? The answer is yes. Now, the origin of this, very briefly, as I would probably try and explain it, is that in the late 19th century, single-sex schools became popular amongst the growing Japanese middle class. There was an admiration for Western culture and an eagerness to jump ahead in national cultural development by adopting any ideas that they could from overseas, which was also seen as a way of kickstarting the economy through these cultural innovations. And in 1920, a story named Yaneura no Nishijo was published. This book took place in a boarding school run by a religious organisation, as was often the case in Japan at that time and for that class of people at whom these moves were aimed. The two protagonists share an isolated attic room. They play a duet together on a piano very intimately, and there is a moment where they need to choose to leave that protected world of the school and venture into the outside as a rite of passage. Later, helping to really cement this set of ideas, came a book named Otome no Minato, which remodeled the senpai and kohai dynamic through the notion of sisterhood. So anime and manga begin to pick up where these early feminist novels from Blue Stocking sort of scene left off. This Catholic school environment was retained. It's treated as an exotic setting that allow authors and artists to encase their characters in a protective bubble. They can portray them as being at a slight remove from the world, so there's a lot of heightened emotion, and they're allowed to say things that you wouldn't always get to say or feel, or to express. And in a lot of cases, you could make the accusation that these are stories about people who are lesbian until graduation. That easy hand-wavy trope that, oh, of course you kiss girls, well, that's all you've got, but it's practice for boys. But I would argue that that's still a really, really valid and important thing that they're portraying. The idea that girls have this comfortable intimacy, even when they may not turn out to be lesbian themselves in the long run, that they wouldn't have if they weren't in this single-sex space, and they would actually be taking sort of longer to find themselves in that way, even if they are eventually going to be heterosexual and strictly identify in that way. The halfway point between sisterhood and romance is treated as Schrodinger's cat. Within the school, the romance both exists and does not exist. We never have to state whether or not the romance is alive until the moment when the protagonist has to turn to face the adult world and decide whether or not to bring her affection with her into the really harsh light of the real world of adulthood. So when you file the serial numbers off of something like Onisama A, it may be really hard for a Western viewer to see why that's set in Japan at all, because the heightened emotion screams 1920s and its politics and its intricacies. It feels to a Western viewer like it's more of a historical piece of anime than a political one. but it's not how the Japanese authors have perceived these works when they were created. That genre is now firmly rooted in a set of ideals and images that originated as an import from a certain time and place that has reached a static state. It's rooted in aspirational Western-style education of an era, and that specificity is treated as a recognisable set of constraints in which to create further works. So on to, I've labelled it as genre fiction, myths, legends, and other. There are so very many books out there, as it turned out. Oh yes, sorry, this first. Sorry. Sorry, it's deep. This is from Nagasama Kamita. I'm writing this to show which this is at any I'm not saying so. Genre fiction, myths, legends, and other. We start with Altered Carbon, which is a British cyberpunk novel, and author Richard K. Morgan. In a future where consciousness can be transferred, a former UN elite soldier, who now works as a PI, is investigating the death of a wealthy man. In 2003, gosh, that's how numbers work, he won the Philip K. Dick Award for the best novel. Netflix subsequently adapted this to live action, and a subsequent companion anime film was made. This is more in the mould of the co-productions and continuations that we examined last year. I've included it just as context because it does have a genre fiction novel as the source material. This is actually pretty generally well concealed that it's being made by a French animation studio, Anima, but they are really strongly associated with the anime industry on the whole. They have a co-credit for Sandland. They've done a CG for a range of anime shows, generally pretty well respected. It was also written by Satadai and Kondo Tsukasa and directed by Nakajima Jo, so I feel that the anime credentials are probably fairly solid, even though they're trying to say, oh yeah, it's all from Japan, it's for the Japanese, oh, you only like Japan, right? I'm not afraid of the French, so don't lie. From something like this to something maybe a little bit less aimed at adults, we have Spider Riders, which is a co-production that has simultaneous debut in Canada and Japan as an anime. I wanted to summarise it as it is likely on the more obscure side, but the Wikipedia entry I found for it was already unbeatably succinct and unhinged. 11-year-old Hunter Steele searches for the legendary inner world by following instructions in his grandfather's journal. He enters a pyramid where he finds a mysterious manacle that attaches to his arm. A spider startles Hunter, who falls into a hole to the centre of the earth and into the subterranean world of Arachna. There, he discovers a small group of elite warriors struggling to survive and to save Arachna from the attack of Invectives, a race of insectoids. The warriors are children, each fighting with the help of their own 10-foot battle spiders. Now, I could have researched further, but my mind was already beginning to crumble. So, another one I'd like to highlight, lesser known anime film potentially, perhaps also lesser known, it is based on a British children's novel. It's The Imaginary. It's a recent one. It's about a girl named Amanda and her imaginary friend Roger, who was nominated for the Carnegie Medal and the Kate Greenaway Medal. In Japan, this book was called Yanura no Raja, which is Roger in the Attic. And it looks like a lovely one, if anybody's seen it. Is it as good as it looked when I was looking into it?
It's nice one.
Nice. Yeah, that is one of those sounding with fake praise words.
It's a pleasant one.
Is it gentle?
It's gentle. There's a little bit of depth, like darkness. There's definite depth to it.
Yeah, no,
But it's very much
about
about, it's not an action.
what happens to your childhood imaginary friends when you don't recognise them. That seemed like the sort of vibe. I thought it looked ever so pretty though. Probably a little bit more obscure again, unless we have any mainland Europeans in here, or practically anybody in here whose first language isn't English. There we go, we knew somebody with that. So, Tony Wolfe was the pen name of an Italian illustrator, comics artist and author, Antonio Lucatelli. And its anime adaptation is A Bosco Adventure, which is about Apricot, the elf princess of Fountainland, who is kidnapped by villains who want to keep her away from her homeland until the upcoming solar eclipse. If she can get back to the throne in time, she'll be able to unleash the power of water to destroy the forces occupying her homeland. And she embarks on a journey to said homeland, aided by the animals of Bosco Forest. This is widely popular throughout the non-Anglo world. It was broadcast in Arabic in Kuwait, Oman, the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. It was also broadcast in Bulgaria, Cameroon, Egypt, France, Canada, Estonia, Hungary, Israel, Poland, Russia, Latvia, South Korea, Spain, Mexico, Chile, Thailand, Serbia, and Italy. Just started missing out on this sort of thing again, which is annoying. So we have an Australian one next. Emily Rodder is a prolific author in several genres, including adult murder mysteries. For obvious reasons, she has a different pen name when she's writing for children and adults. Her real name is Jennifer Rowe. Del Toro Quest ran to 15 volumes, so sold 18 million books. It's a fairly standard setting. The central character is a blacksmith's son named Leaf, who sets out on a quest on his 16th birthday. And he aims to fulfill his father's abandoned quest of restoring the Belt of Del Toro by finding 7 gems, each hidden in dangerous locations around the magical land of Del Toro. Now, Rodder was very reluctant to allow any adaptational changes to the story, and had been looking at turning down film offers and such. But she felt that they had very limited respect towards her source material. However, something interesting about Rodder and her kids is they love anime. So when OLM approached her, she was like, yes, anime me up, baby. They did change Leaf's hair colour. They made the obligatory blonde central character for a Western story. The anime has 65 episodes, adapting the first 8 books of Del Toro Quest. It was supposed to be 52, but it proved so popular during its original airing that they added 17 episodes of original material at the last minute. The director is Honjo Mitsuru, a prominent animator who's directed Crayon Shin-chan, IGPX, Outlaw Star, and Sakura Tyson the movie. There is also a DS game, and a manga. Most of these are actually based on the books rather than on the anime that's based on the books. Now, from what I've been able to find, the anime does not feature a huge amount of acknowledgement of the story's Australian roots, but I do have a little piece of trivia. The third opening is sung by Delta Goodrem, the Australian singer. Anybody wondering why not an awful lot appears to be actually happening plot-wise in this opening sequence, I can't help but notice that the Delta Goodrem opening theme would be number 17 episodes, which were added after the end of the story. So, on to a more adult work of genre fiction. We have He works
Oh no!
Thank you. E.E. Doc Smith, who I didn't realise why his name was Doc Smith until I was looking up what works he'd written, and it was like, oh, here is his paper on silica in sand, and I was like, oh, he's a doctor! That's why they called him Doc! He's sometimes called the father of space opera, and he was the creator of the Lensman series, which was a runner-up for the Hugo Award for the best series of all time, losing only to Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. In the Lensman setting, and my god did I try to pass this, but when you've been reading loads of things, okay. In a post-human future, the only living life form, the Irisians, have foregone physical skills in favour of developing their contemplative mental power, as they are sure that they are safe and alone in the universe. However, their continuum collides or coincides with that of the Eddorian people, who are dictatorial and power-hungry. Hijinks ensue. The Irisians begin breeding other life forms which will be capable of fighting their enemies and restoring peace to the universe. They gift humans the lens, a device which gives its wearers mental capabilities and bridges communication gaps between life forms. And the human Virgil Sands begins to travel the universe to test and recruit a patrol to join him. Which is the most anime shit, let's be real.
I love this!
It was killer finding even...
I need to throw things at Nanto to get the goddamn torrents out.
Yeah, seriously. Even the art was so baked, everything I could find. I tried to find decent res images in
That's
case
because it never got an official home release past the first 6 episodes.
Yeah, no, I know.
No, we had to get it off people who recorded it off the telly on Betamax in the 80s.
I love Minamicon so much.
We had the first gen copies.
Oh, so good.
The audio was still better than the official releases though.
But seriously, every image I could find looked like it had been in the toaster for 2 days. And I thought this was like pretty well known, but I was like, I think I'm wrong.
There was a rights argument.
That'll do it. So, yes, there we go, because I've got the name here, Harmony Gold.
What a surprise.
Well, it's not going to have helped, is it? It doesn't usually help getting home releases. So, yes, as we were just saying, Harmony Gold released 5 of the first 6 episodes. They missed one out. They were heavily edited, and they called it Lensman, Power of the Lens. There is no get prizes for guessing who the writer credited on such an adaptation might be.
McRae?
Is that how you pronounce it?
I think so.
Oh! I've said his name a lot in other panels, and I did not pronounce it that way, but I think you're probably right, so I'm gonna not say it. And that one man whose first name is Carl, who does the thing to the anime, such as roboteching them. So, yeah, Galactic Patrol Lensman is extremely different to the book, but it is an authorised adaptation. It has since been alleged that the executors of Smith's estate disliked those changes enough to reject future attempts at bringing Lensman to the screen. I now also wonder if that's got anything to do with the rights argument as well that you've been talking about for getting a domestic release in Japan.
The story I'd heard was apparently the estate were negotiating with getting like a Lensman Hollywood film, and then the tape sort of came over from Japan and they went, what the fuck is this? and suggestions that it might have also, oh, there's already a Lensman thing out, that means selling the rights, you can't sell universal rights to Hollywood or something. No one gives exactly the same story, but supposedly there might be one variant of the story has the executive and daughter of E. Doc Smith threatening to go over to Japan by Katana or something.
Wow, it's a mutual system. It's like the circle of life continuing. You've got Miyazaki sending over his for Warriors of the Wind, and she's gonna like drive over to Hollywood, get the katana, get on the plane.
This has gone through several decades of rumour mill.
I love the rumour mill. It is everything to me. Oh, I just realised that I've got loads of blank pages on the back. I thought I timed it better than this. That's good. I've got about the right man. I should slow down my talking. That's pretty good. Okay. So, got one more pulp sci-fi one, and that would be Captain Future. He originally appeared in the Captain Future magazine between the years 1940 and 1944. This story is set in the distant future, 1990. 50 years ahead. And it features the protagonist, a space-travelling scientist and adventurer who uses his brains rather than brawn as he fights supervillains. Captain Future did do well internationally, and it also had a Harmony Gold recut as a TV movie in English. Oh yeah, I should actually show it to you. And the Japanese original soundtrack was composed composed by one Ono Yuji, who is famous for his work on Lupin III. So the German edition of Captain Future replaced the Yuji Ono jazz soundtrack with a synth disco funk track, which has since achieved cult status. So, according to my notes, I'm truly pushed for time. So I'll be looking at just two more outstandingly unusual sources for anime adaptations. The first one is one I've only heard of because of AJ, as is so often the case. It's a truly odd meta take on adapting ideas, because it's also what's happening in universe in the story of the show. Has anybody here seen the anime that is based on this?
No.
Just AJ?
Not as far as I know.
Oh no, it's pretty openly based on this. People taking photos of each screen. You will get further with the name Moshidora. It is always called Moshidora, but I thought it was more self-explanatory with its full title. It also has a live-action version. So this is an anime about a student whose friend is the manager of the high school baseball team, and she goes into hospital suffering from severe health issues, and the baseball team are feeling awful about it. The manager's friend is feeling awful about it. The manager's friend doesn't know anything about baseball, and she's like, oh, the only thing that I can do to help anybody is to try and help this baseball team that my friend loves so much and has spent all her time and effort on for all these years. I will try and help manage the team, but I don't know anything about it. So she goes to a bookshop and she picks up. I've written about what it was somewhere, haven't I? No, I haven't. Oh, it's because I wrote just the facts about it. But it's a book from the 70s. It's this very dry book of business hot takes, basically. Most of them are actually pretty debunked. There are all these ideas about like supply chains and how you should divide tasks and outsource things that you don't want to be the core thing that you're doing in your business. Basically, it's kind of a lot of semi-obvious management ideas that people hadn't put in so many words before. So it was a fad in the 70s, this guy's works, and now people are like, well, yeah, any fool could say that, and it doesn't mean it all comes true. But in the 70s, it was treated as a pretty big deal. I wouldn't say that Drucker's management was such a hot property in 2011, but the idea is that this girl goes and gets the book on management and uses it to manage the high school baseball team. But the manager of a high school baseball team is usually the person who washes the kit and is nice to people and goes and liaises with the school if stuff isn't going well. And then it can take a more hands-on role, but it is kind of the girl who does the helping role, even though they're called the manager, so it's sort of based on this fundamental misunderstanding.
I say, what did she outsource?
Was it the washing of the uniform?
I don't know, AJ only saw the first episode with you, I think. What else does she outsource with management? I know marketing is the second episode.
Yeah, don't remember.
That good, how?
I think AJ might have watched one or two anime since 2011, in fairness. And finally then, I promised you Bible. And Bible,
Yes.
you shall get.
It's a Bible book.
It is the last but certainly not the least. No, it's not bloody Bible Black. This is my sensible panel.
I was hoping not, but
I was wondering if people were giggling at it, and I put two and two together and I'm like, no!
Bible.
That's a porno.
Anything else?
So, I just want everybody to be happy, knowing that the final Osamu Tezuka anime to be published posthumously was a completely sincere adaptation about the Old Testament.
You're a furry.
To misquote Mark Simpson, I just think that's me. It is actually the fourth Japanese-made animation about the Bible, but it's the only one that was made as an anime, in that it was intended for distribution in Japan. In the West, it's known as In the Beginning, and in Japan, its name means Osamu Tezuka's Old Testament stories. And the reason that Osamu Tezuka started work on this before his 1989 death is that the Vatican, through a different company, directly contacted Osamu Tezuka and said, please make us Bible anime. And he was like, that's a great idea. So it had some production delays, so due to that, while he died in 1989, he is considered to have like properly been working on this, though it didn't air in Japan until 1997, and it ended up being supervised by the completely unrelated Asami, because it's a given name, Asami Tazaki. Oh yeah, I've got just enough time for a little bit of footage from Bible anime. Again, it's the advert for the box set. It ends. The last episode is the birth of Jesus.
Does it have biblically accurate angels?
If they're not a thing, it wouldn't, because Hezekiah liked his book, so.
Finish up now.
That's more in the meta materials as I understand it. Book of Enoch and such is more. I don't think there's as much as people think. Not the
There
very
isn't,
specific
but there's
set of traits we're talking
There
about.
are.
And then there are some things like there's the wings that cover your eyes, or whatever it was implying. What is it?
It's your feet.
The wings that are to cover your feet. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, not your feet. So, just to wrap it up then, if we can draw any further conclusions from the examples that we've looked at today, I would say that last year's examination of direct adaptations of non-literary works had overall a more commercial cast to them. But the literary works that we've examined today are predominantly more artistic pieces, even when they were commercially successful, like Bungo Stray Dogs, or even when they were intended to be a one-and-done throwaway TV special, like Yaz's work on White Fan. Steeped in children's literature originating in the Western world as they grew up, we can see throughout these works a real artistic strength stemming from a wide knowledge base, which is one of the things that the older generation of Japanese creatives have always pushed for. They don't like self-referential anime that only pull from other anime. I mean, there's merit in things like talking in a video, but when you have your nth isekai that's only based on the other concepts of isekai, rather than going back and reading something like Cavendish's The Blazing World, which is the original 1600s literary isekai, you lose something because your range of ideas and knowledge becomes so much more limited. So even though we're sort of moving on in time with a lot of these, the fact that they're able to draw in these ideas from the West in a more comfortable way is a really good example of what the older generation, then these people were prizing in their creatives. So because this generation of anime creatives grew up with a more multicultural education than their predecessors, they have a real confidence as creators when they are able to reinterpret and reimagine those Western works that feel more like something they're entitled to play with. They're not museum pieces anymore. These are expressions of emotion and whimsy like any other kind of story. Your Mononokes and Ayakashis or anything that puts a spin on something Japanese, well, they are now more comfortable doing the same with Western works, often to really great effect. And often, like Alice was saying, with Ada was saying, with the fact that they will sometimes make little Japanese mistakes, like having this thrown away item of household stuff, that they perceive it as a story that they can do what they want with because they think they've understood the whole story, and they'll sometimes just miss that there's still a Japanese person looking at a non-Japanese work or set of ideas. So if I do pull myself together and manage yet another panel on this theme, I really would like some time to get together and go over the anime which are literary and aimed explicitly for children, the ones which are based upon children's literature from the Western world. Obviously there's the Calpis World Masterpiece Theatre Block, its rivals and imitators, and there are so many more really, really wild, obscure places where anime studios have found their inspiration. I still haven't even got to the anime that made me go, what? I want to do this panel in the first place. So I will ask Nez at some point, pretty please, if I'm allowed to do this again, and I would hope to speak to you next year, if possible.